On tonight's program, we go over the ins and outs of dialogue.
When I'm talking about types of dialogue, I'm not talking about conversations. I am talking about dialogue boxes.
How to tell other genres in the Foundry. I don't know, how would you approach doing slapstick comedy in the Foundry?
I don't know, I mean, obviously it's kind of difficult to literally make people slap other people.
And the question of the week, what other game would you like to see the Foundry in?
Well, it might actually give me a reason to start playing DC Universe Online again.
Join us on the Foundry Roundtable. Hello and welcome to episode 29 of the Foundry Roundtable, the podcast exclusively covering the Foundry for Star Trek Online. I'm your tame Foundry author, Drogon1701. With me is Rigelian Zookeeper Greendragoon.
Get your Rigelians right here, Rigelians, free from the zoo.
And Dorian Dairy Manager Markhawkman.
On Endor they use bugs for dairy.
And Cardassian Vole Wrangler Hippiejohn.
I'm very good at my job.
And we start tonight with some Foundry news. This afternoon, in fact, this being Wednesday, Bran Flakes announced the 8th challenge. It's going to be time travel, which I think is cool. I love time travel stories.
It's exactly my kind of thing.
Definitely a favorite topic in the Foundry.
I think a lot of us have actually already made a lot of time travel missions.
There are a number.
Yeah, I've made one myself. I mean, that's what the VAT mission that I made was about.
Yep. So you've made one, Hippie, you've made one, I've made one. So, Greendragoon, where's your time travel mission?
You don't really know what happened when you went to that wormhole, do you?
This is true. We could have been sent 5,000 years in the future.
We were sent 5,000 years. It's obvious.
You're not across the galaxy. That's all that's left of the Federation.
Oh my god, it was Earth all along. Now, we have to say that some of us don't really think it's a good idea to have a challenge at the moment, given the long load time bug is still there. And as we find out today, there may be a trigger for it with costumes and not just that right side menu.
There's multiple triggers with costumes.
Well, with costumes, what I noticed is that you're editing the costume in that bar on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the same bar that you would drag and drop things from when you're placing objects on the map.
It doesn't seem to do it all the time, though, which is confusing.
No.
It's confusing, I think.
And so here's the thing. I'm going to be completely. I think it's a bad idea to have the challenge right now because the editor is not fixed. I think you made the metaphor in your response to the forum threads something along the lines of you fixed the leak with duct tape when what you really need is the plumber to come install a new pipe. That's kind of what the workaround really is. And admittedly, this new thing with costumes sucks. But if you know that it exists, and that's the problem that I have with the challenge right now, is that not everyone knows that the workaround even exists, or how it works, or how good it works. As soon as you do anything with costumes, save your project, close it, and then reopen it, and you're fine. But if you don't know that, you're going to go back to 7, 8, 9 minute load times. I've heard, maybe not quite that bad yet, but I've heard people saying 4 and 5 and 6. So.
Experience has been 4-minute load time.
And I've seen up to 10.
The thing that Brandon could do to make this challenge acceptable or better for me to be happening the way that it is and right now is get a full description of the workaround and everything that we know about what's causing the slow load times and how to avoid it, how to avoid those slow load times, and link it with the challenge so that anyone who is thinking about entering the challenge has an equal opportunity to see this is really important to read if you're authoring right now. That would make me very happy.
I think that's a good idea.
Actually, that would make me very happy.
Because it's not.
It's not.
You know,
that
I'm not like demanding that it be stopped until this is fixed. It's just the issue of having all the authors on an even footing.
That's what I said earlier is it's not that it's undoable. You mess with a costume, save the project, go out, come back in, you're still fine.
Either of you guys go to the check out the Neverwinter forums at all?
No.
Their Foundry forum?
No.
I pop on occasion, but I haven't done it in the last few days. Apparently
they've got a bug right now with their profanity filter.
Is it oversensitive or undersensitive?
Oversensitive.
I still can't erect a force
seemingly
field
catching random things, and I don't know, it's very strange.
Well, it could be a variant of something that it does in Sto, where occasionally it will interpret text strings, see if they match the keywords that it has stored in it, without space.
Okay, here's a post from a guy who his stuff was getting caught by the filter. It says, "Fight my minions."
Oh yeah, that's pretty
was
explicit
profane.
right there.
Yeah, that's terrible. And this is the end. That makes no sense. But yeah, the devs said it was a bug and they were fixing it. And I kind of wanted to chime in. It's like, really, profanity filter not working? Let me tell you what some real problems are like. But I didn't.
In fairness, it actually is a pretty big deal because
I think it probably would be because of course it prevents you from publishing your missions.
Yeah,
but it really is a big deal. But it's like what?
From what I've heard, a profanity filter thing is very entertaining to people who play the game in foreign languages because the profanity filter is exactly the same regardless of what language you're.
Yeah, it catches English spellings of things in foreign words.
Foul-mouthed foreigners.
All right, well, let's see. Anybody else have anything to say about the challenge? I mean, generally speaking, I love the challenges. I love playing the missions, and I love time travel. So, I mean, other than my issue with doing it right now, I got no problem with it.
Yeah, I'm gonna play devil's advocate on that just a little, and say that Brandon's job as community manager is basically to keep interest going into the game, and part of the way he does this is through these various events. So it's occasionally just one of those things that, as he doesn't know when the fix is going to come through, so he kind of has to soldier forward. So as much as some may like to, just kind of hold everything off until the Foundry is the way we want it, it's probably just as well that he does keep at least some focus on the Foundry. Even for our sakes.
Well, I think the better way to do it would have been which he is doing, is to pick up again with the spotlights. Because, there's absolutely no problems right now with playing Foundry missions. The problem is on the editing side. Yeah. And so I don't think it's a good idea to do an editing contest when editing is screwed up. It's not 100% screwed up, but there's an issue.
Oh, if this mission ends up with a lot of very low entries, it probably will be a sign.
But will that be a good thing for the Foundry overall?
It's not something that will have any long-term impact on it. At the very least.
Yeah. Well, and I guess we
the seriousness of the situation.
He said he's pretty much said, well, we're doing it. So, what he did say is he hopes they'll have this narrowed down in a couple weeks, and he will extend the deadline if he feels he needs to. And he says, at the very least, he'll give this time while it's still going on for authors to prep storyboards and script things and that sort of thing.
He's soldiering on, like a good little community manager.
Well, I always admire that about him, that he is able to do that.
We're basically waiting on. As far as I can tell, we're waiting on the core team to get around to fixing it, or at least narrow it down and fix it. So, we've
been waiting for 3 months for him to do that.
Yeah, and it probably doesn't help that they're also pushing out a major update to the Neverwinter Foundry at the same time.
That was going to be my second piece of news, actually, because there's something that came out in the last day or two that they're getting over on Neverwinter, which is tags for missions, such as, combat heavy, story heavy, that sort of thing. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work yet, but that was in their patch notes, their update notes. They're getting that.
Yeah, this is actually something that we've kind of known about for a while now. I mean, they haven't exactly been secret about what's coming to them in this update.
But I still love how the update was phrased, the screenshot that I saw. It says something about you asked for it and we delivered, which obviously we've been asking for that one for years over here.
Yeah.
We might get it.
We probably will. I mean, at the moment, I don't entirely know how it's going to work. I mean, if it just ends up being like everybody puts in a bunch of custom tags, I don't know that it's going to improve things.
No, I have no idea how it's going to work either. So
I almost want to say, that there is some merit in seeing how it goes with Neverwinter before they foist it on us.
So Hippiejohn is in the middle of a big lightning storm at the moment. We hope he will be able to rejoin us with his voice later, but he's in the chat room listening to us talk. So why don't we move along to what we've been working on? Greendragoon, go for it.
So, a large portion of this weekend, which is when I usually work on Foundry, was taken up by the fact that Gen Con was happening this week in Indianapolis. And this was the first chance first time really that I had gone to it. So, that was a new and wonderful experience. But as a result, I haven't been doing too much in the Foundry. That said, I've been able to spend a little bit of time. I've been working on kind of finishing up my Jeffries tube system, as well as kind of making updates to the existing Jeffries tubes to kind of match it to some of the style changes I made. I've also been working on the last map, which is a space map, one of the few space maps, and been trying to figure out the scene that I want for this. And originally it was going to be like 2 stars close up. I was going to use gas giants for stars, and then just use the space lighting to kind of make them glow with a bloom effect. Unfortunately, the space lighting is broken and has been for some time, and there's no indication that it's going to be fixed anytime soon. So I've kind of had to scrap that idea. In fact, a little known fact is that part 1 actually, the binary star, the Nibirus ray is near. Actually, the stars used to be much closer as actual bodies. Unfortunately, I had to pull them when the space lighting broke, and then just put in those distant stars to fill in. But I've been trying to figure out what to put in this place, and so my second choice has been a black hole, trying to recreate a black hole using like nebula and a spiral pattern. Unfortunately, the black part is giving me troubles, and I haven't quite figured out how to make the hole. Ideally, it'd be some kind of sphere, very black sphere, but we don't have anything that's dark enough, and so I've been trying to like expand the middle to make it in a hole, but nebula are thick enough that you can't really see the hole unless you're like absolutely on top of it. So I haven't really figured out what to do about that, and I'm teetering between moving on and trying to find some other interesting stellar phenomena to base this last map around, or what. But that's kind of been my struggle this week. The other thing I did want to touch on is Stoutes has been doing these very in-depth technical reviews, which I think I'd kind of seen that he had started doing that, but I hadn't really looked into it too much. Well, apparently after he ran out of his list, he started doing missions on his own, and he actually hit my mission. And I actually I found it very useful. I mean, it was very in-depth. I mean, went into like very specific feedback on different portions, and I really enjoyed going through it. I mean, he found several typos that have been eluding me for a while. I don't think I would implement everything he points out, but it's still a very great, I just want to call it tool for an author, just to be able to have that like specific actionable feedback. And I mean, especially authors with new missions that have just come out, I mean, I could see this being a very useful tool. So I kind of want to give a little bit of a shout out to Stoutes and what he's doing there.
Yeah, it looks like he's done about 4 of them so far, I want to say.
Yeah, he's done a few.
Looking at his thread here, 4 or 5.
Yeah, this is something that Evil 70 has a really long thread devoted to, but Evil 70th thread has become so popular that he has something like a 1-month backlog.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think he went through a period of time where he was pretty busy with personal life stuff. So I mean that sort of delays getting all that done. He has quite a backlog at the moment. But, you know, I absolutely love these, like, text reviews and things like that people have been doing.
Yeah. I mean, this is, like, even specific. This is, like, literally specific notes he makes as he goes through the mission. And in fact, I would say it's more specific than what Evil 70th was doing. He doesn't go into a great amount of detail. It's just, it's basically like a very long list of suggestions kind of categorized into different, types of things. Like I said, I wouldn't do everything he suggests, but, still, I mean, it's very specific and often most of it is, actionable suggestions.
Well, but that one mission that I posted for, I only actually noticed one typo, which was in the name of one of the objectives. And my main suggestion for improving the mission was to make it so that one NPC beams out whenever you're finished talking to her.
Hippiejohn mentions that Evil 70th query is longer than a month now, and his queue is running pretty slowly.
He's also saying that it might be time for him to get a new headset. Certainly possible. I just got a new one myself. Been pretty happy with it.
Too.
I got one that's like supposed to be $100, but I got it on clearance, so it was like 60. All right, Mark, what have you been working on?
Well, I started the early conceptual stage for a mission called Adwaita Incursion, which is a mission about a transdimensional crossover from a completely different universe. And then a Federation archaeology team has to try to make sense of what they find on an alien ship from an alternate universe, where history is different in ways that the Starfleet crew didn't think that history could be different.
Cool.
Right?
That sounds interesting.
The basic core of the mission is going to be, contrasting the histories of the two different timelines and having the Federation people try to make sense of it.
Well, I love a good alternate universe or alternate timeline story. Some of my favorite episodes in Star Trek do that. And I'm a big fan of Fringe, which is all about alternate universes and alternate timelines. I think it's a fun thing to explore. And it allows you to do some things that you couldn't in the normal timeline, as we found out with the last couple of movies.
Yeah, so the Vengeance, that particular monstrosity would never have been built in the regular timeline.
No.
I'm not sure I quite buy it being built into the alternate timeline.
It's funny though, because like when I see pictures of models of that ship and pictures of like the concept art, I like it a lot more than I did when I saw the movie. I think when I see those models, I think it's a very cool design. I think very much too big, that's for sure. But I don't know. Sci-fi writers and scale is an issue that is very common. There's a TV trope that says sci-fi writers have no sense of scale. You just write what's cool.
Well, it's true more often than not.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I was talking to, who was it, Chooch99 over Twitter one day, and he was saying that actually some of the original series designs were a bit too small, or smaller than what they should have been, to actually have, the right sized shuttle bay, for instance. It was too small to have that. And they were finding these things when JJ and company were making the new Trek. That's why they're so much bigger. I don't know. I haven't gotten it on my tape measure and tried it myself, so.
That's actually something that's been pointed out several times over the years, that if you look at the size of the shuttlecraft that the original Enterprise launched and the external size of the hangar bay, and then compare that to the internal size of the hangar bay, it just doesn't add up.
I mean, there's been how many manuals and technical charts that have made of it since then?
Many. So, I don't know, scale's always been sort of an iffy thing throughout. I mean, what is it with the Defiant? There's like 3 or 4 different accepted measurements, depending on which episode you're watching.
Yeah.
And what you're comparing it to.
if you look at the Defiant in First Contact, it looks about the size of one of the Enterprise D's working cells.
It's, I think, one of... Because there's a whole big thread going on in the general forum about, and this crops up a lot, about scale, especially with Deep Space Nine, because Deep Space Nine is scaled far larger than it is on the show. Not that that was entirely consistent either.
Yeah, well, that was a design choice by...
When you're working with models that are of different scale, their relative sizes to each other can be screwed up.
The size that it had in the show was something that honestly felt too small. Because, I mean, it's equipped so you can have, I think, 9 different ships dock with it. But,
Well, Taco's response to it was that, Taco Fangs / Tumor Boy, was that they actually had made it the right size back when they were first building the game. Obviously, he wasn't here yet, but, I mean, he must have asked somebody. They made it the right size, but people in testing thought it was too small, and it just wasn't fun to fly around.
Yeah, that's the thing is you couldn't fly around it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because the way the game does it is that when you leave Deep Space Nine, you spawn at an area directly above the central hub.
Yeah, right in between the pylons.
The smaller version of DS9, there's only room for 2 or 3 ships there. So once it started trying to spawn like 8 or 9 different people would get pushed out of the space station.
Yeah, that was definitely a choice of logistics.
Gameplay over reality. Well, quote reality, because we're talking about something that's entirely fictional here. So we wandered off a little bit.
Just a little.
I will say that I really have not gotten into the Foundry very much, more than just in my head thinking about things and thinking about how to build some maps. So we'll just go ahead and move on. So let's do some mission reviews. Mark, start us off.
Well, mine is a mission called Bloodthirsty Enemies by Amahood. In this mission, it's a continuation to a previous mission, and I didn't play the previous mission, so certain parts of the plot were lost on me. But in this mission, you need to find out, basically, sorry, I forgot. It's a KDF mission, and I need to mention that for starters, otherwise people will get confused about why you're fighting Starfleet. Anyway, so in the mission, you find out that somebody has put out a hit on you, more or less, and you hunt them down and take them out. But when you do that, you end up finding out that it was a trick, and they really wanted you to come find them so that they could stick their vampire allies on you. Yeah, he came up with some sort of vampire race that, well, it looks like the person died, but it's one of those cases where probably not. Anyway, so what it is the bad guy in the story is a Ferengi who is allied with Starfleet. You need to find the guy and kill him, more or less. So, you had pretty straightforward up until the part where the vampire guys show. After that, the story gets kind of weird, but in a good way. I don't remember how it ended, so I can't quite comment on that, but overall I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, Hippie says this is the second part to the one that he reviewed several weeks ago.
I was thinking about this, and this is not the first vampire mission that's been in the Foundry. Weren't there like a pair of vampire missions early on done by someone?
It's certainly possible. I can't recall one.
Back when I was working in the Foundry early on, in and amongst watching all those broadcast UGCs, I actually watched Cerberus Films' channel a lot. The one he's got basically playing Foundry videos 24/7 on a playlist. The one that you can link to on the Starburst. Okay. And there was one of the previews, and I've listened to everything on there several times over. One of the previews is that for a mission I think was called like the Vampires of Ryza and My Friend the Vampire. And most of the content on there is like old stuff back from early Foundry. But
that's quite old, yes.
I've heard of that Vampires on Ryza mission. I don't think I've actually played it though.
yeah,
So
it just
I
kinda
don't know,
makes me
that makes an interesting topic, because what do you guys think of taking things that are, more like from horror movies and putting them into Star Trek? I mean, it's not exactly the first time it's happened as far as Star Trek goes. I mean, they had that whole Halloween episode in TOS, which was kind of ridiculous, to be honest.
Well, there's okay. In TOS we had the Gorgons, we had the Salt Vampires.
TOS definitely like to borrow from mythology.
Then there was the Excalbians. That was just screwball of fun.
We've had a lot of telepath stories about, telepaths that can attack you in various different ways.
I don't know, I think Star Trek as a whole kind of treats horror the same way Doctor Who does, except with less humor. You can do horror, but you kind of got to explain it by the end.
You got to have sort of the science explanation of it.
Yeah.
Oh, there was that episode of TNG where Dr. Crusher finds out that there's this weird sort of cyanoplasmic entity that has been feeding off of the people in her family for centuries.
And it was kind of like a ghost story, but there ended up being a scientific explanation for this ghost.
Well,
yeah.
The explanation, though, gave you more questions than answers, because the way the explanation was worded made you wonder how many more of them were out there and why this is
Hey, maybe there's a Foundry mission in that.
I mean, even Cryptic kind of got pretty horror-esque with the Davidians.
Yeah, a little bit.
I still consider What Lies used to be one of the most surreal episodes.
I love that one.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite missions, just because it's like you got so sucked in when you played it. Don't play that mission in the dark.
I wish we could do things like that with the lighting in
Control of Lightning.
In STO.
It's high up there on my list of wishes.
In the Foundry. There's a whole thread about that, actually, is, how to do sort of horror elements in Foundry missions. And that was the thing, and I kind of went back to the game Unreal, which is from like 10 or 12 years ago, where the first time you encounter the big bad alien, it's, you're at the end of this long hallway and the lights shut off in a pattern towards you, and then, you hear this big screech, and then suddenly it's coming at you.
So the encroaching darkness.
Mm-hmm. And, unfortunately we can't do that in the Foundry. Not exactly.
Yeah.
So we'd love to have stuff like that.
I will say that I'm building a custom interior in the black space of an interior map, and that is pretty dark. I mean, you got to find some specific lights to get some brightness in there.
Yeah, those.
And if you go for some of the darker backdrop, it can get really dark. Now, you couldn't have lights switching on and off unless you use one of the like the candle lights, which
there's only a very few actual light emitting objects.
Which space map was that again?
The interior maps.
Which one are you using?
I am using one of the caves.
You're building in the black space.
Well, I mean, it really depends on the backdrop you use. All the lighting is attached to the backdrop. And for a while I was trying to kind of start to catalog all the backdrops and see what they did to the fog, the lighting, and whatnot. And
what happened to
got
that?
So far, and
lazy bum.
Well, I needed to rethink my approach. I realized that my descriptions were not varied enough, and then it occurred to me that I should really go back and actually take screenshots, build some kind of scene that really shows off the lighting, and then take screenshots of each one so people can compare and contrast.
Well, it'd certainly be useful if you ever get around to getting that done.
Yeah. Which do you want first, that or part 2?
That's a good question. Why don't you, how about a mission review in the meantime?
Okay. Hippiejohn says part 2. All right, so this week I played a mission called Writers of History by Don Quixote, which is funny because this mission would fit perfectly into the just announced Foundry Challenge. It is a time travel mission, as the name kind of suggests. The opening description doesn't give too much, but as far as the synopsis, you're called back to Memory Alpha because you were behind on backing up your mission logs. And there you kind of meet the historian who's kind of in charge of basically making sure that these mission logs are fit in continuity. And I mean, it's really fascinating because he actually gives a lot of examples of ways that previous mission logs had continuity errors in them. And he actually uses, I guess what you could call them plot holes from the shows, and basically chalk them up to, examples of these continuity errors where things were not recorded properly in the log and they conflict with, other things. So the one in specific that, he brings up that he'd like, is the, use of the, what's called the life support belts from the animated series. I don't know if any of you guys watched the animated series.
Anytime.
I have not.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically there were the
first Star Trek I ever watched.
I don't know if you ever saw them. Apparently they used these, life support belts, which basically formed a force field around them. And it was kind of an excuse to not have to put on, environmental suits. And the argument that the, author brings up is that, if these very advanced, life support belts were on use on the Enterprise, why did they never show up anywhere else in history? I mean, why are they still using environmental suits in First Contact? So he kind of chalks it up as this continuity that the crew talks about using them, but nobody else used them. So you're basically asked to engage in a little historical research involving time travel, and he basically he actually references back to the temporal node that's used to get out of the end at the end of the Davidian series, the one that Franklin Drake installs on your ship to get you back. So you use that to go back in time to basically towards the end of the Enterprise's 5-year run to go investigate and try to explain this or solve this mystery. And you've got a technical trick where you basically, since you're in the past, you have all the prefix codes for all the ships. So basically you can tap into the various ships that you encounter and basically override their sensors and prevent them from detecting you. So you do this, you end up following the Enterprise on its way back to Earth at the end of its mission, 5-year mission, and you basically get in scanning range and find you're picking up Borg signatures. And this ends up becoming with this, your crew is basically freaked out that Borg are in the past. So you end up going around trying to search for a Borg cube, can't find a Borg cube. You then head back to the Enterprise, start to try and deal with the Borg signatures you're picking up on the Enterprise. So you end up beaming aboard the Enterprise, kind of trying to avoid anybody who might notice that you're out of place. And you end up finding that there are no drones per se on the Enterprise, but somehow nanoprobes have made its way into members of the crew. And the rest of the mission is basically you trying to first figure out how these nanoprobes got into these crew members, and they've slowly kind of been assimilating these crew members from the inside, and they haven't been totally effective. So the crew members really don't fully realize what's happening to them. But basically trying to repair all of this damage. And it ends up that you end up kind of, I would say, causing some ruckus. You don't destroy the Enterprise, but you come pretty close to it. A lot of it seems a little bit over the top. I'm avoiding the ending to not give anything away, but it's a pretty packed plot and it's a little bit over the top, but at the same token, the author is actually really good about connecting all of his dots. So, I mean, nothing is mentioned or there's no out there details that don't actually end up being resolved by the end of the mission. And it actually ends up being like a very fun, very big scale mission, a very packed mission. But like I said, token, it's actually very in-depth. I mean, he makes a lot of reference to stuff happening in the shows. He's very good about his Trek references. I mean, he actually ends up coming up with a excuse that wraps all of this together, including your original reason for why the life support belts no longer show up in the outside of the animated series. But I mean, like I said, I mean, this was his first mission, but it's a very good first mission. I mean, it's pretty clear that the author is definitely dabbling with a lot of Foundry tech. I mean, there were a number of scenes, for instance, where you're at warp, where he does the warp effect, plays around with triggers and stuff. I mean, it's definitely he's definitely working his way into the Foundry, and I mean, my only recommendations for him would be there's a few things that could use some polish. I mean, just to kind of clean up the seams and really pack everything tight. But I mean, otherwise, I mean, it's I definitely would consider it a solid mission, and no qualms about leaving my Foundry tip for this one.
Sounds good. Let's see. I unfortunately did not get to any of the missions in my queue this weekend. Through sheer laziness, I can assure you.
Sure, you weren't at Gen Con 2?
No, I don't have any good excuses at all. I know Hippie had some reviews. Hopefully maybe we can record those at a later time if we can get his microphone working properly, or get the storm to pass overhead, whichever comes first. So, discussion topics. Greendragoon, why don't we start with the technical topic?
So this week we've got a big one, and this is actually one I've been planning for several weeks, and then it kind of got bumped a couple of weeks because we had other more immediate topics come up. Also, Hippiejohn says he'll put his reviews in the thread. But anyway, this week's topic is the various types of dialogue and when, where, and when to use what. Now, when I'm talking about types of dialogue, I'm not talking about conversations. I am talking about dialogue boxes. And there are actually 4 different kinds of dialogue boxes in the Foundry. The first is the standard storyboard pop-up dialogue. The second is the dialogue with contact objective. The third is the default dialogue, which can be assigned to objects. And the fourth is the map dialogue. And it's kind of important to know what all of these different map dialogues do, because they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So with that, I think I will kind of open it up. What do you guys think?
I should define map dialogue as, on the right side menu, the one that causes all the slowdowns, the little dialogue bubble icon that you take and drag and put on the map. And I find that one very useful. Because you can trigger it to start to trigger on different things. Like, for instance, you can trigger it from, an enemy being killed. You can trigger it from a object being interacted with, or trigger it from a reach marker, all that kind of good stuff. It's very useful for, of course, optional dialogue. And optional objectives is really about the only way you can do optional objectives is with map dialogue. I also find it good for putting in little, things that aren't necessarily relevant to the story objectives, things that don't have to go into the storyboard. And the other reason it's useful is you can then trigger other things to happen off of particular choices made in that dialogue. Like, we were talking a while back about multiple endings and how to do that. And the one way you can do it is essentially to trigger things off of map dialogue, because you can't trigger anything off of dialogue in the storyboard. So for instance, yeah.
I was going to say, you're basically referring to the on dialogue reached trigger.
Yes.
Which is really, I think, one of the most powerful triggers that we have at our disposal.
Absolutely.
Because we can have different triggers based on different choices that the player makes. So I kind of want to touch on some of the strengths and weaknesses of the map dialogue. Since we're going
since we're going on map dialogue.
first off, it's one of the only triggerable dialogues that doesn't reside in the storyboard. And it's also one of only 2 map dialogues that can have a failure, or can end in a failure, where basically it reverts and you have to click it again to start over. Now the downside to this, in comparison to the other one, which is dialogue with contact, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is that when it minimizes down to this ops button down over on your along the side on your interacts. So unfortunately, if you, for instance, trigger it from like a console, you don't re-interact with it by going to the console. You have to know that this little ops button that's sitting down there will reopen your dialogue. And unfortunately, in most cases, this is kind of an annoyance. Although recently I've been come up with a way to make use of that. I've been kind of playing around with the idea of persistent dialogue boxes, where you keep going back to the same dialogue to communicate with people or change different things. So it's a persistent interactable dialogue that doesn't matter where you are, you can interact with it, which is kind of nice. In my case, I'm using it to fill in for a comm badge, where you basically contact these different teams and you can have them do things to help you progress. But unfortunately, for most cases where people will be using, like with interacting with consoles or something like that, it could be an annoyance. The other, keeping on the map dialogues, the other one that you can put on a map is the default dialogue. Do you want to talk about that?
Real quick before we move on to that, there is one more downside to map dialogue. Now, any dialogue you put in the game will wait to start until you're out of combat. Now, this can be a problem with default dialogue because, of course, it won't. Your objectives might progress, but if you're still in combat, you might get some dialogue that won't start until you're way further along than you wanted the player to read that. Yeah.
And that's actually another point. Another limitation is a map dialogue cannot directly be triggered by a reach objective or objective complete or objective in progress. Those options are not available for map dialogues. That said, you can still trigger a map dialogue from an object that also is triggering a objective. In fact, you can do it from NPCs as long as the NPCs already have a reason to be interactable.
So, moving on to dialogue with, or default dialogue.
So, default dialogue is kind of the most limited of them, and it's one of those features that I think kind of got half implemented. You basically can tie a dialogue box to any object or NPC that you want. This is really nice, especially if you want to have repeatably interactable consoles or something like that, or have like a data pad that you can go back and reference to at any time, or even things like optional dialogue. Unfortunately, at least in the case of objects, the interact button will always show interact. There's no way to customize this like there would be if it had been triggered from the storyboard. And unfortunately, I mean, this can be kind of a limitation, especially if you have a number of these default dialogue objects near each other. You'll just be presented with a bunch of interacts. And of course, I mean, it takes you a little bit out to see an interact button versus a read the pad button.
I have to say, one thing I like about giving objects default dialogue is that you can hide and reveal options in a default dialogue for an object pretty much at will. So you can like have one console go somewhere else, then when you come back to the console, it actually has different options in the dialogue.
And you can actually do that for any dialogue. I mean, pretty much all dialogues have a set of triggers tied to each of the choices in a dialogue tree. So they can be turned off and on for just about any type of dialogue, which is actually very powerful.
Well, with default dialogue, though, it's better than stuff like the map pop-up dialogue, because with default dialogue, what it gives you, since you can always come back and look at it again, unless a trigger hides the object that you interacted with to open the dialogue. So it gives you more options than you would have otherwise.
Yeah, it remains persistent.
That is one of the things that I was going to say, is that it is repeatable. The default dialogues, whether on a player or an object. So you want to make sure that it's something that you don't mind if the player sees it again. Yeah, and that was one of the comments that Evil 70th made a couple times on when he was reviewing my missions, is that, there was some dialogue that was, optional, that you could walk up to a person and talk to them a little bit. That he said it would actually be better if you used as a map dialogue. You put a little object underneath the NPC that you want to have optional dialogue with, and make that an interact that triggers a map dialogue that the player will only go through once rather than repeating.
Yeah, I mean, and it is possible to make objects that have default dialogue invisible. So you can, at least with objects it's easier. I mean, it's a little harder with NPCs, but not impossible. So the other two dialogue types are both on the storyboard. The first, of course, is the traditional pop-up, which is pretty straightforward and is used to kind of intersect. There's not a lot of options related to this. One thing I do want to note on the pop-up dialogue is that if a pop-up dialogue is placed after an objective, that pop-up dialogue will kind of act as a spacer between the objective complete of the previous objective and the objective in progress of the next objective. So, for instance, if you have an enemy or a kill enemy objective after a pop-up dialogue, that enemy won't spawn in until the pop-up dialogue is complete. That
can be useful. If you want to make sure that things are timed the way you want them.
Yeah.
And which I know we all do.
But I mean, even when you're like setting up triggers and whatnot, it's good to kind of keep that distinction in mind, because it's one of the few times, I mean, oftentimes you can kind of argue, well, what is it better to use the objective complete of one object or the objective in progress of another? This is one of those few cases where those two really aren't the same, because they're not happening simultaneously because of that pop-up dialogue.
Well, that about cover it?
The last one, of course, is the dialogue with contact, and this is probably the second most useful dialogue, and this is the other one that can have a failure objective. And it's also the only one with a failure objective that actually remains tied to a specific object, or in this case, an NPC. And I mean, it can be very useful. In my mission, I wanted to have that feature for a console or a couple of props that you interacted with, and so I actually ended up reskinning NPC contacts as props in order to kind of get that functionality in. Of course, the downside of this is that the interact text is set by the engine, not you, and it'll basically say talk to insert the name of the NPC, which can be a problem if you're using one of the prop NPC costumes. And I ended up getting around it by naming the NPC science officer about field emitter. And so whenever the interact would appear, it would be talk to science officer about field emitter. Fortunately, it also kind of brings up some questions about why I have an NPC's named science officer about field emitter.
It's a very good question.
Yeah, well, there is actually a fifth type of dialogue that the Foundry had very briefly on Tribble, and that is the dialogue with object. This made a very brief appearance on Tribble for testing and was actually pulled because it was only somewhat functional. It was missing a lot of the options, wouldn't do anything. And this is basically just like a dialogue with contact, except it's tied to a specific detail object instead of a NPC. And if anyone with any power at Cryptic is listening to this, we could really use this. I mean, this is a very powerful objective that I would very, 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 very much like to see return to the Foundry one day.
I would definitely agree.
I mean, if you want to do like computer consoles that have lockouts or puzzles, I mean, this thing is a gold mine for puzzles. Anything where you want to be able have the player have an option to fail.
The other thing that I would say about dialogue is that I would encourage people to type in the names of NPCs in that field where you can do that.
Yes,
I find that very useful when I'm picking up a player's mission that I've never played before to know who's talking to me.
Yeah,
Get to know the player.
I'm kind of curious because this kind of came up last week. What are your thoughts on the title for bridge officers?
I don't mind when that one's not there. And I'd say if you're going to do it, do something like your science officer or science officer, something like that.
Because I mean, I would always leave it blank, but I was kind of surprised to hear that not everyone thinks it should be that way. So I'm just kind of curious.
Pretty much the only option to leaving it blank would be put in something like tax-based or something like that, because, well, there's just not. You can't put in an actual name. You have to put in a description of the bridge officer in question, and it needs.
Yeah, it's more a description than a name.
Hippiejohn says he likes your insert career path officer.
No, what he says. He says your XXX officer, and I like that one too. All right, so let's see. Moving on to other discussion topics. One thing that I was gonna sort of throw out there this week is ask you guys sort of, well, what things keep you out of the Foundry? What things distract you? What things, do you get annoyed with the Foundry and you're like, oh, rage quit, I'm not going to do this anymore for a while, things like that. Because I've run into a weekend or two here where I've had absolutely no motivation to be in the Foundry, whether for me it's often another game because I play so many. Hippiejohn says women keep him out of the Foundry. We will hope he means date, not his mother. Things like that. So what keeps you out?
Well, he can't defend himself. It's funny because when I made part 1, I was unemployed at the time, looking for work, and so I ended up. What really got me into the Foundry was that I turned making my first Foundry mission into a job, and for a time it was my job to make a Foundry mission. And I would work from like 9 to 5, basically working in the Foundry. I mean, there was a lot of me learning it and stuff like that. But I mean, and while I wasn't 100%, or kept at it, but it's still, I mean, I got a lot done. I mean, and I was able to learn the Foundry very well and then, turn around and I think put out a pretty good mission. Unfortunately, since that time, I've actually gotten a real job that pays like money, and I can't do the full-time Foundry author thing anymore. Which by one token, yay, I'm employed again. The same token is like, boo, I can't be a full-time Foundry author anymore. It's really funny because I've only grown to appreciate the Foundry more the less time I'm able to spend in it. But yeah, I mean, work is definitely a big one. Obviously, we don't want to be in the Foundry every waking moment. We do kind of want to pretend we have lives. And so, life can sometimes get in with it. Sometimes I go out and visit family, stuff like that.
Yeah, pretend that we have lives.
Go to things like Gen Con. That's living, right?
Sure.
I mean, other than that, I mean, sometimes, I'll run into, issues of I'll get stuck on something. And, that can be a, demotivator.
Writer's block, of course.
Yeah, it's kind of the technical equivalent of writer's block. And I've found most cases the best way I can work around that is to switch points and work on some other aspect. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is just plain old writer's block because we're writing the script. I ran into this a few weeks ago where I just couldn't figure out how to progress in the scene where I was. And it just, once I was able to figure it out, it sort of, the floodgates opened and I was able to work through it. But just plain old writer's block can be tough.
Enjoy the highs to get you through the lows.
Mm-hmm. But, I don't know, it's all about working towards that moment where you're finally able to publish. And sometimes it can be a rocky road and sometimes it can be easy. I mean, there's been a couple of missions where I was just so inspired and just bam, worked through them in like 24 hours and got the mission done.
I could never see myself doing a mission in 24 hours.
Well, you're weird. So no, because I mean the majority of my missions take about as long as yours. So
I don't know. I mean, once we get to September, it'll have been a full year since I released part 1.
Yeah, I've got some that have been sitting in there for that long. My other problem is too many projects at once, and I get too unfocused. It's like, working along on on one project and come up with a great idea for another project, and then I'm working along on that one. The first one doesn't get done. And Hippiejohn's saying you must experience real life to have experiences to write honestly about. And plus watch sci-fi.
I was gonna say, I mean, that's how I can do anything in the Foundry, is years and years and years of watching Star Trek. I mean,
absolutely.
I briefly toyed with trying to do something in Neverwinter, especially when it was bright, new, and shiny and there weren't very many missions in it. I thought about trying to be one of those pioneering authors, but I just don't know enough about Neverwinter to feel like I could write about it. Certainly not on the level I write about.
Yeah, I would be completely making up my own canon with Neverwinter.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing.
I don't know anything about I don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, and B, I don't know anything about the Neverwinter section of that. So,
but I mean, even more than that, so is that I use my knowledge and passion about Star Trek to kind of fuel my writing for it.
Maybe that's what I do. I need to get back to watching some Star Trek.
I mean,
and get my motivation back.
I know. I mean, the villain of my series, the Eidolon, was inspired by me watching an episode of Enterprise.
Well, one thing that I do a lot that takes up a pretty good chunk of my time is Space Empire 5 modding. If you're not familiar with the game, it's one of those. It's a turn-based strategy game where you're the leader of an interstellar empire, and it's your job to take over the universe, more or less. And I spent several months a while back writing a mod that made it so that the game was Star Trek themed, which I have to say I never actually finished the mod, so I'm probably going to end up spending quite a while finishing it in the future.
And when I was in college, I did a little bit of modding on Elite Force, trying to recreate Stargate Command in Elite Force.
There were some very, very excellent maps and mods for Elite Force, as I recall.
Yeah, mine was
somebody who made.
Never got very far.
There was somebody I recall who made. I think it was like a Starfleet museum or something like that, and it had, recreations of the TOS sets and all kinds of different crazy stuff. It was excellent. I mean, there was nothing really to do in the map. It was just really cool.
I think anyone who's attempted to mod has an appreciation for just how long it takes to develop something for a game.
I tried to do some modding in in Medieval Total War, the original one. Wanted to make a mod to make it like the Silmarillion, Tolkien's backstory of the whole of Lord of the Rings.
I tried to read that once.
It'll take you a few tries. I can tell you that. But yeah, modding is difficult and time consuming, especially because, we're volunteer labor, and setting our own hours.
Yeah, that's
for no pay. So,
Well, I found that being a modder, also, I used to be a modder for Diablo 2, but I quit that several years ago. But being a modder gives you an appreciation for what actual game developers go through with trying to get things to work that
absolutely.
The rest of the gaming community can't even fathom.
Yeah, I mean, even just working in the Foundry, kind of just gives you an appreciation for just how much it actually takes to give out a complete thought. And we've got a lot of the aspects of modding handed to us in the Foundry. We don't have to build our own assets. I mean, we just work with what they give us. We lay them down, and we kind of go from there. There's a lot of game development is time consuming.
I know there's a lot of people who would love to be able to create their own assets. However, I don't ever see that in our future.
Although
no assets, no textures, because I think they run into a lot of issues of what if somebody created an obscene looking object and put it in the game?
I mean, funny enough, it's been something that has come up with Neverwinter, and it's been suggested in interviews, and the Foundry devs there didn't say no. It was closer to a maybe one day. And in fact, Dan I believe at Star Trek Las Vegas at one point was asked about that. I think it might have been at the dev panel about the possibility of importing assets. And his answer wasn't no. So I mean, I kind of found that kind of interesting.
One thing that I thought of that you would probably run into rather often is third-party stuff, because let's face it, a lot of people who are Star Trek fans are also fans of other sci-fi works, and if given the opportunity, they would write Foundry missions about those.
Yeah, crossover missions, you'd run into user license agreement issues.
I mean, I don't see how they would ever do it without some hefty moderation system, and I don't see them devoting that much time and effort. I mean,
Well, and of course, for people like me who I have tried to do some 3D modeling and failed spectacularly at learning it, the Foundry is something I can do, where all of this stuff is done for me. I can, this is something I can handle. So I don't need it to be any more in-depth than it already is. I mean, if other people want it to be, that's fine. And if they wanted to make it for you guys, that's fine. So that you could do some models. That's fine. They have some issues on their end to work out before they would allow that. But, if they do, that's great. I wouldn't partake in that part of it myself, but.
For the moment, I'm going to leave that in the pie in the sky. Yeah.
It's not, the sandwich analogy is something that the forum guys love to use, like I have a sandwich, so how can you possibly be hungry? That sort of thing. So in this case, it's more like, I don't want a sandwich, but if you want it, have it.
I don't know, it just probably means that my Foundry missions will take that much longer.
Well, one particular, counter version of that has been mentioned in some of the threads that could, uncharitably be construed as whining is, you have a sandwich and I don't like it, therefore you shouldn't have it. That one's been used on the forums a few times. But honestly, that particular one has been brought up in some of the more heated Foundry discussions, though. So
anyway, let's see what other topics might we want to go into tonight. Anybody got anything in particular? Hippie, what was your topic gonna be?
As we watch this little animated pencil. Oh, I don't know if that's one we want to tackle without him. John's kind of our storytelling master.
Yeah, we talked about. Okay, so what Hippie is suggesting is the different approaches to telling stories in the various types of genres. I mean, we talked about horror a little bit earlier. Horror is something that I don't feel like we have the tools to tell properly because we can't control lighting very much and we can't control sound.
I don't know. I would say this, or what is it, the Mains of Balnar Rune that Alamek made came pretty close. I mean, that was pretty suspenseful.
So, how did he do that exactly? I mean, I haven't played that one, so clue me in on a little bit on that.
I mean, he does it a lot through story. He's basically, it's a case of where it's suggested and implied basically through the ramblings of a crew member who's basically gone nuts, and done all these things. Who keeps claiming that to watch out for the mains. And it basically, you end up going through, you're basically trying to, escape this, base. And every time that you try to make some progress, you're usually either set back or you're, stymied. And it gets to the point you're fighting these, end up fighting these rogue holograms and you're going after to shut down the field generator. And then the holograms keep coming and generally the whole place is pretty dark and, kind of spooky. And it ends up building up into the suspenseful fight to just try and get out alive. all the while having these vague illusions as to what's going on, and it all seems very surreal and very, the stuff that science would say it's just in your head, except that things are going way weird and things are happening that shouldn't be happening. And even at the end, I mean, you're given a choice to try and find out the mystery or do the right thing and save a crewman. And I mean, yeah, I mean, in a way, it's almost kind of a mind game in how it's written.
Let's see, and Hippie's suggesting, some of the other sort of genres, like what he's been doing lately with cartoons.
Yeah.
And the difference there being, of course, you want to do a lot of over-the-top comedy. I don't know, how would you approach doing slapstick comedy in the Foundry?
I don't know, I mean, obviously it's kind of difficult to literally make people slap the other people, but
you could have people do emotes, although I don't know if there's a slap emote.
I don't know if it has to
do a Three Stooges
physical humor, but by the same token, you can kind of almost do that, like the Abbott and Costello grade humor, where it's almost it's the
who's on first routine.
Yeah, the verbal jousting,
a verbal patter.
I mean, it's all play on words, and it's very and
which is of course how many of us do comedy in our Foundry missions already. Is you got to do it in dialogue.
Yeah, and I mean,
trying to remember if I had any laugh out loud lines in my Foundry missions.
I mean, it can even be inserted into more serious missions. I mean, we definitely had some funny dialogue in that, is the Sciences mission we played through.
We did. Of course, sometimes the funny things that I do, it tends to be throwing in a recognizable line from something else, which is sort of, it's hilarious in context when you see it. Like, the one that just popped into my mind is not actually in Foundry mission. It's in Fringe, where John Noble's character, he wakes up after being essentially cryogenically frozen in his mind. He's just suffering from some brain damage, and they're leading him around, and the bad guys come up and they're questioning them, and they're trying to slip through the net essentially, and he's just grinning like an idiot, and at one point he waves his hand at the guys and says, "These are not the droids they're looking for." And it's a laugh out loud line because of the context. The context is so seriously, he tosses in this line. So throwing in a funny line is good for any genre, I think, as long as it doesn't detract from the story.
I mean, you can also do it where the situation is just so absurd that it's funny. I can't help but think of all of those Ferengi episodes in Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
Or even ones like
the Magnificent Ferengi.
Where it's just kind of, Klingons and fuzzy creatures.
So let's see, romance is one that I have thought about. How to do a successful romance in the Foundry. And my thought is, with that one, to make it optional. To make it an optional part of the story. Because you're gonna run into a lot of people who say, my character would never get with this person. For whatever. Yeah. For many, many reasons. So, yeah, I would make it optional.
I would rather just, leave it as something that the other characters in the story have, and not the captain.
Yeah, it's one of the things that's really hard to have a romance when one of the characters is a complete unknown.
Mm-hmm. I guess actually I have done one that way, where it was, the characters. It was a romance story on the part of other characters that I introduced, rather than the bridge officer, rather than the captain. But the one that I had thought about, and I thought about this a long, long time ago, I never have made this mission, was to introduce another character. The plot of the mission was going to be that, while on this mission, this person gets sick. The only way to cure them is to go on this really, really dangerous mission into the heart of, Borg space or something like that. And, you go through great lengths to save them, and you can either go through great lengths to save them because because they're a member of your crew, and you're a captain, you would do that anyway, or because you start flirting with them, you start really liking them, and you want them to live because you're in love with them. And, the story would end before you really even have your first date or anything. It's just, the growing attraction.
Yeah, I'm not seeing too many romantic comedies in the Foundry, though.
That's true. That would be fun. Let's see. The other one is Morality Tales. Which of course is at the very heart of Star Trek. And it's one that I've done. in my Mirror Universe mission is very much a morality, a choice of morality tales. As you either let someone do something good and run a huge risk, or deny them from doing something good and eliminate the risk to your people. So, I like to let the people choose their morality tales. But, you can get in trouble doing morality tales if you want to do things that are referencing things that happen in real life.
Well, the first thing I think of whenever I think of morality tales and fiction is that a lot of the time, if you go the route of portraying one of the choices as clearly wrong or clearly right, you're going to find someone who has a different opinion. And with a lot of the stories I've seen people write, the idea that something was clearly right or clearly wrong existed only in the head of the person writing it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that doing a Foundry mission is different than an episode of Star Trek, where in an episode, the characters are the ones arriving at their conclusions, whereas in a Foundry mission, it's the player's character that needs to arrive at the conclusion. And you ultimately have to be very careful about how much you control the player's character. It can be a big turnoff for a player if they feel like their character is being railroaded too much, especially if it's railroaded into a morality choice.
Yeah, it's especially one that they disagree with.
Yeah, we should never forget that the player is the main character of any mission.
But at the same token, there is a chance or an opportunity there, if done right, big disclaimer there, for the player to make a choice. And especially if the author kind of keeps himself out of it and really leaves it up to the player. There is fertile ground there.
Absolutely.
I've been toying with something of a morality choice with the ending to Part 3, which essentially kind of comes down to the needs of the many or the needs of the few. And obviously I'm not going to make the choice for them, and either choice is a viable one. But a part of me is almost hesitant to even take it that far, because just it's no matter what they choose, it would force them to deal with an undesirable outcome. I know Hippie has also kind of talked about doing something along those lines, or at the least dealing with those undesirable outcomes. So I don't know, what do you guys think?
Undesirable outcomes.
Where there's no right choice. No matter what you choose, there's going
it's certainly true to life.
True.
Oftentimes there is no right choice.
But at some point also, you gotta remember that this is entertainment, not life.
True. But, I don't know, I think the best stories out of Star Trek are the ones that feel very true to life.
Yeah.
Even if not me personally, but they feel like things that would happen to real people, and the reactions that real people would have.
Either way, I'm sure it will require a gentle touch, and
and of course, as we always like to say, is that there's room for just about every kind of type of story you could think of in the Foundry.
Hippie says he loves it, but feel it must be presented carefully in such a way that the hero experiences heroic moments, even if the final moment doesn't feel heroic and like a win.
All right, well, I'm going to move on now to our question from last time. We asked the community, when you're talking about multi-part Foundry missions, series, how much is too much? How many parts are too many? And we got quite a number of different responses on this. The first one was from Skyline. I reviewed Skyline's part 1 of his series last time. And he says that, he answered my questions. He said, you do indeed learn more about the species that he introduced in episode 2 specifically reveals a lot about their history.
Thinking back to that, and I seem to remember a lot of the debate around that was how much to give away in the first part. Mm-hmm. And the kind of, obviously, the sticking point is whether, you have to give away enough to
keep the player interested.
Yeah, interested and not feel like nothing was answered. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. But you want to hold some stuff back.
Yeah.
I think, which is why I said, I would never mark him down for that, because I assume he will clue me in on it later. If he doesn't clue me in on all this information later, then I'd mark him down. But he says he will, so. Let's see, Pax he says his Ghosts of War series was originally to be 8 parts long instead of 6. He scaled it back, because he could see things starting to get repetitive. And he has a really good answer to these. He says, the answer to your question, how many parts is too many, is that when a big chunk of your series is slowing down the advancement of the overarching plot, you've probably got too many parts.
Yeah, I mean, you almost kind of look at it from the sense of there's an episode story and there is a arc story.
Pax, I read the thing that Pax said, and he mentioned that he stopped and looked at his overarching plot and realized that 3 of the episodes that he had scripted out were more or less the same, just in different locations. So he decided to condense those into a single episode because they were redundant.
You definitely have to look at what, not repeating yourself when you're doing a multi-part mission.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of the hardships with a multi-part series. How many movies have we seen get made that are like sequels or whatnot that just are too much like their previous parts, or kind of fall into the...
Blues Brothers 2000 was a complete rehash of the original movie.
Yeah. You
don't want to do that. Now, when I was doing my 5-part series, I ran into a thing where I had nothing for part 4. I had no idea what part 4 was going to be, and I needed to figure out what it was going to be, and that took a long time for me to actually figure out how to do it. And one of the things I came up with was to actually do a little bit of a recap, do a scene where you explain everything that's happened up to this point, and I actually got the idea to do that off listening to the commentaries on one of an episode of Stargate, where the director says, when you get to the 4th act, it's a good idea to have at least somebody to spend just a little bit of time summarizing where you've been, in case nobody's been paying attention, in case there was a part of the episode that they missed, or a part that didn't make sense to them until you explained it to them a little bit.
I've seen a few Foundry authors who did a very good job of that. I don't remember the name, but this particular individual, he actually put in the mission description, like, okay, this is what happened in the previous installment, and wrote out a pretty in-depth explanation of it, instead of, writing out an actual description for the mission, which, it gives you a pretty good idea as to what's going to happen in this story, even without a proper mission.
And, if you do sort of the previously ons at the top of each mission, you might not need what I did. And really, the thing that I did could probably be scaled back a lot, actually. Now, Lincoln in Space writes, he says, how many parts are too many? Personally, I've never played a part 2 of anything, and with our search menu, it's hard to get plays for part 1. As an author, I feel sequels are a risk since people might not want to invest more time in your story. Following parts will never get as many plays as the first. Now I
don't know if that's true.
It's probably a case-by-case thing, because in my series, I noticed that the middle parts got far fewer plays than the first and the last. And I don't know if I should say they got far more reviews. Now, I don't know about number of actual plays.
True. We have no way of knowing how many people actually play the mission.
I mean, there might be people who play all 5 parts, but only leave a review on the final one.
But since just about every review I get says, when is part 2 coming, I'm going to assume at least a few people are going to play it.
Well, if it's good enough, if it catches your interest enough, you're going to want to play part 2. I ran into the other part of this. I ran into a lot of people who would start in the middle or start at the end and be very confused, leave a bad review, and it's like, for crying out loud, people, start the first one.
Another tech we'd love is campaigns.
Yeah, that's actually a feature that I would greatly like to see imported from Neverwinter, because in Neverwinter, you can set it up so that when someone completes part 1, the game will give them a pop-up message asking them if they want to play part 2.
So that is probably the one thing that I would like to see most. from Neverwinter, is that campaign system.
And just, the ability to gay people so they can't play part 2 before they play part 1.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Stoutes, whose mission I reviewed, is part of a series that he's making. He says he wants to not, he definitely doesn't want to shoot himself in his own foot, so he says he's going to max out at 6. 3 Fed, 3 KDF in this series. He said too much is when you're at 16 missions, or 40. Because I don't think anyone's going to really play that many missions from you. I think people are going to want to move on to another author, even if they really like it. And especially because doing 40 missions is going to take forever. So
something I kind of want to throw out is, do you think it's almost a bit of a trap for newer authors to do multi-part missions because they want to do so many things and they can't fit it all into one mission?
Possible. I know that I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for first-time authors. I did, and you did.
Yeah.
Well, I sort of
well, we give advice that we don't follow ourselves.
Published missions were part 1 of however many, and I never actually published the part 2s of anything, so,
Of course, I've got ideas for sequels to almost every one of my missions.
I don't know, it's something I struggle with is, trying to scale down my ideas enough to fit into one mission. So I can imagine that other people also might struggle with this, and then turn to multi-part missions to try and compensate it. Or as occasionally as some authors do, it's try to cram everything into one mission, but that doesn't generally go very well.
Well, the advice that we always give new authors is focus.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is This Science says a trilogy is ideal, because trilogies sort of conform to a normal story arc. We see a lot of trilogies.
Actually, it says 4 is too much, 1 is ideal.
So yeah, we got a lot of good responses to that.
Yeah.
Pax also says that his 6-parter is the only one of that length he'll ever do. Now I've got an idea for another 5-parter because I didn't particularly like the 2800, this featured episode series that Cryptic did, all about the Dominion and the Ghost Fleet that the Prophets sent away, and they had to go somewhere, so they came out in our timeline.
Well, I have to say though, that I like the concept because the whole idea made sense. Because
I absolutely love the concept.
Now, the specific implementation, well, one thing that someone pointed out when that episode went live was that if you were to actually count the number of player ships in orbit of Bajor, you had enough player ships to take on a fleet of 2,800 NPC ships and blast them out of space.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that's a conceit of the gameplay there.
Yeah, a little bit. But you're absolutely right. I loved the concept of that fleet. Cause I absolutely love the things that Cryptic is doing with which, taking sort of one-off things from the show and expanding them and making them bigger. Like the disappearance of that fleet. But, I didn't particularly enjoy the missions itself and some of the characters. The main Jem'Hadar bad guy did things I thought no Jem'Hadar would ever do.
Well, I kind of disagree with you there because the fact that we do know that the whole Catch Yourself White thing, for example, the founders apparently created that because they felt it was necessary. Were they being paranoid and thinking that it was necessary? Maybe, maybe not, because there were several instances in the TV show of Jem'Hadar going rogue.
That's a good point. They didn't breed the same deficiency into the Vorta.
That's because
this is true.
Didn't have that sort of rebellious streak that the Jem'Hadar did. And apparently the founders hadn't been able to find a way to make the Jem'Hadar, Jem'Hadar, without having that sort of rebellious streak in them.
And they wouldn't nearly be as effective soldiers if they limited some of those tendencies. That's a good way of thinking about it. I didn't think about it that way. However, I still wanted to make my own version, and someday I will. Because I've outlined this whole thing, and I was gonna. really excited to make the first mission because I was going to make it like a war movie. Have you be, very gritty, all about, essentially the plot would be that you go to resupply this moon on Durna, or, which is a moon of Bajor, and you're supplying this, where they're building a new outpost on there for some reason. I haven't worked that out yet. And you're there when those ships appear through the wormhole, and you're left there with, limited supplies, limited weaponry. Your ship has to pull out, and you essentially have to hold out until they come back to you. It's like, I'm big into history, so it's like, the 101st being trapped at Bastogne in World War II, where they had to hold out until people could come and get them and, break through the lines to get them. So that was going to be the first episode. And then you got to figure out, where did this fleet come from? You got to go to the Gamma Quadrant, and I was going to bring back Benjamin Sisko in some way, probably as a ball of energy or something. This is going to be the return of the Sisko, and then it was all going to be, you were going to go find Gul Dukat's son as, the only Cardassian leader who could rally them to your side. This would be the actual Cardassians, not the true way, the actual Cardassian government. Only he was going to be kidnapped by the Maquis, the successor to the Maquis, who was going to be under the command of Tom Riker, who's been freed from Cardassian custody. So, it was gonna be this huge thing. I would love to make it someday. I hope I'll get a chance to.
Because Tom Riker, I could see him being, a leadership type. Someone trusted by the Federation, not so much. But the whole thing about Gul Dukat's son got me thinking because,
haven't you used him in one of your missions or something like that?
No.
Well, I mean, he's got like 7 kids or something like that, but somebody was telling me that he
most
used,
of them are legitimate.
There was one Mikor or something like that.
I can think of being seen on screen. Of course, Tora Ziyal was half Bajoran, so that had multiple.
And she's dead anyway, but spoiler.
Yet somehow I've got a Dolph named Elam Ziyal.
Ziyal is a Cardassian name. Could be a common one, for all we know.
Actually, one thing I realized after looking at a whole lot of Bajoran and Cardassian duty officers is that, with a few exceptions, they use the same pool of names to choose from.
It's tough making up names.
There's more connection between the Cardassians and the Bajorans than either would like to admit.
Well, I mean, the Cardassians and the Bajorans have had intermittent contact with each other probably for centuries. I mean, that war between Cardassian and Bajorans, I mean, that wasn't first contact. That was the Cardassians.
No. And that was recent. It was only like 50 years before.
Yeah, but that war, that was simply a shift in relations between the two powers, not, them trying to get to know each other. That was the Cardassians being dicks with someone that they had been trading with for a while.
But anyway, I think we will go ahead and end this podcast here. We're going to end with a question to the community because we like doing these, reading everybody's responses. So our question this week is going to be, if you could take the Foundry and put it in any other game, which game would it be? Essentially, which game would you love to have a UGC tool?
Do we get to answer now, or do we have to wait till next week?
I'm comfortable answering now. I mean, my answer...
Champions Online.
Of course, we've said that before. We think it would save Champions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they'll ever get any glory back, but yeah, if any game that needs a Foundry, it's Champions.
Mark, what would your answer be?
Well, it might actually give me a reason to start playing DC Universe Online again, but maybe not. I don't know.
Mine would be Lord of the Rings Online, because I really love that game, but I don't love the later parts of it, the most recent expansion packs, mostly because the mounted combat thing doesn't really work very well. For me, I mean, it must be working for somebody because they keep saying how great it is, but it doesn't really work for me. It's very laggy. But I really love that game, and I'm a huge lore nerd for Tolkien. So I would have so much fun putting in stuff from the Silmarillion and from the other pieces of lore. So
yeah,
that's what I
don't know. I just could never see anyone in control of the Tolkien lore allowing that much freedom to the players.
That's the trouble with it, and I don't think it would happen in Star Wars, the Old Republic either.
Yeah, that's the other one I think is like, I just couldn't see it happening there either.
Hippie says, Champions, which, I mean, in a comic, in a superhero game, I think it'd be very awesome myself. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Diablo 3 is a maybe for me, I suppose, because of the fact that the structure of the world has so many loose ends that you could explore. The story path in the first two Diablo games is so extremely linear that you're focused on what happens in a very tiny part of the world in the first game. Very, very small. The town of Tristram and a bunch of holes in the ground underneath Tristram. That's it. That's all, the entire scope of the first game. The second game, you explore the world around Tristram and several other locations, and, you get a bit more than just the tiny bit that you got in the first game. In the third game, well, this is the part where you get to, wander around and see the sights and find out where the bad guys came from, and how they, and just general stuff like that.
I think Diablo 3 would be a good one for it, because it is almost a 2D game, almost, and it would be really suited for that sort of mix and match objects way of building things that we do in the Foundry. I think that'd be a good one. But we want to hear from the community. What game do you think would benefit from a UGC tool similar to what we have in the Foundry? Not talking full modding tools here, but something similar to what we have in the Foundry. So leave your opinions in our forum thread or comments on the on Starbase UGC. But that'll do it for us tonight, guys. So we'll say good night.
All right, good night.
Good night.